Super excited to talk to you today. This is wonderful.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm excited to talk as well.
So let's start from the beginning. I want to hear what it was like for you stepping into the series and what you felt your signature touch was going to bring.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, stepping into the series was both incredibly exciting and daunting, if I'm honest. It was, working with Gary Oldman, Kristen Scott Thomas, Jonathan Price. These are titans. So obviously, there's a little bit of trepidation going in, but also unbelievably excited. When I started the job, only season one was out. Season two came out a couple of weeks later, and then season three the following year. So I'd seen the first season, was a really big fan. I absolutely loved the tone, loved the blend of different genres. What you could get away with. The comedy I thought was fantastic, but also the action and the thrills, and the way it depicted London. So very, very excited to get started. I had a 14-week lead into the shoot of pre-production, looking at locations, going around London. And then in terms of what I could bring, I mean, I had a very particular take, I think, on what I wanted the story to film and look like. I really wanted it to be heavy and wintry, for it to feel cold, for it to feel that very miserable London that I've grown up in. Felt like a very interesting tone for this particular story about, which is ultimately the story of River and his father, you know, quite an emotional story. So I wanted to bring, I already had it, but I really wanted to make London feel very cinematic, grounded, but very cinematic. And I wanted to find a way of just, I think, pushing the emotion, for revealing the characters a little bit more, getting to understand and feel, particularly River, introducing some of these new characters, pushing the humor I could, pushing the action, trying to push them all at the same time and seeing how much we could get away with. So,
Quite a juggling act, I imagine.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was really, really interesting. It's how far do you push things. You really want it to be tense and suspenseful. You really want it to be believable and for you to feel there. But then also it's slow horses. You want to be, there's always got to be an element of humor that comes in, certainly, but it's got to be humor in the right place and for the right reasons and through the characters. So we'd shape out those sequences. I talk to Will, the writer, and we talk about how much, how cool is River? What's his escape like, And then when do we drop that? When does all that pretense go? When is he James Bond and when isn't he? How much mayhem can we cause, really?
That's a beautiful part of the show. I feel like that's why people love it so much is like just it's just this awesome blend in so many different areas and you really do each genre perfectly and just marry them all together. Was there a moment in season four, like what was that first moment where you could really feel the magic was palpable?
So we shot France first. We did 2 weeks in France. So I mean, immediately, like the first day, I'm working with Jack and Hugo, so that's just unbelievable already. But in terms of really feeling like, oh, I know what this is, and I know what we're doing, and I think we're pushing in a really fun direction, was when we shot very early on in week one, River escaping out of the bathroom and jumping onto the roof and filming it and hoping that it was really scary and suspenseful in terms of this dog chasing him up the stairs and all of these guys with weapons, and then doing this shot, that I'd sort of figured out with the stunt guys, and we built this roof where he jumps across and strides, and I knew we were going to have the music swelling, and he swears at them, and you're like, yeah, cheering him along, and then he goes straight through the roof and lands on the on the ground, and it was like, oh, we're hopefully riding this kind of wave of suspense and action and comedy. And it was very slow horses, but also it feels new because first of all, just being in France just felt very different for the show and seeing River in a different way.
So cool. So cool. Such an awesome show to be a part of and lend your expertise and your vision. I do want to specifically talk about the finale
Sure.
and how that evolved. Did you have a specific vision when you read the script, and did it change, or what were your thoughts? How did you want that last episode to play out?
It did evolve. In the script originally, it was much more in sections. You had the river story where he was chasing Frank. He caught Frank. He sits in, with him, and then it cuts to Slough House, and then you play out all of the Slough House shootout. And it felt like what I really wanted to try and achieve was to intercut these different storylines for everything to come together. Like the third act of a big movie, that all of these different storylines kind of coincide and impact each other and mirror each other. And I really wanted it to be full of big action and anarchy and chaos and thrills, and then become slowly more emotional and suspenseful, I guess. At first it's grenades and shooting and kettles being thrown. And then slowly, hopefully, without really noticing, you start to shift into something a bit more serious. And you have characters actually being hurt or being deeply emotionally affected by what's happening, and taking you to a place in which we have obviously Marcus, being killed. He's killed off camera, but we're leading to that, and we're leading to River, sitting down with his dad, and ultimately having him taken away, and him sat there, completely sort of defeated and aghast that this was his father and this is what's left. And so I knew that we needed to get there, and I wanted to get there in a kind of in a big sequence that was that would feel really cathartic. And then, I mean, leading up to that was also, the end of episode 5 was all about experiencing an incredibly intense sequence with River. The car is smashed in front of him, and he's taken and he's put in a boot. And I knew I wanted to start episode 6 from a different perspective. I wanted to see the carnage that occurred at the end of 5 from kind of God's point of view, to be up looking down, and for us to move towards it, and for almost to say to the audience, we're leading you back in. Leading you back in, and we're gonna slowly tell you what happens next. But first, we're going to be slightly removed from it, and every 5 seconds, we're going to introduce another bit of information that the police are coming. The dead bodies. That flight is alive. That Taverner's position, and slowly bring you back to River's story. And then I knew we had this long dialogue sequence where he was going to sit down with his father, which is a very static sequence. And I think there was discussion, can we get away with just 2 people sat in a restaurant for 10 minutes? And I think that, hopefully we'd earned enough in the 5 episodes leading up to that you wanted just to see these 2 men sat opposite each other. So it was really looking at the emotion of our characters, and trying to tie this family, which is what the show is ultimately about. Trying to tie, even though they're in different places, and River's never with the Slow Horses for the whole season, but trying to tie them together in a way so that they feel like they're still one unit.
Yeah. Well, I imagine too, it's quite a delicate balance because you're telling this very big story this season, but it's so many developments and then things that tie in that you imagine are going to come out in season 5, and then you'll be back for season 6. So it's just pieces of this very large picture and this world that you now get to play in.
Yeah, it is. It's such an interesting show in how it's built, because from the beginning, Gary and some of the execs, he's very adamant he wanted one director per season, and he wanted each season to have its own identity, really, and for that director to have kind of a creative vision for it, which I think is quite rare in a way. So it was much more like making a film. And actually, I always thought you could watch season 4 isolated and you'd understand it completely. But at the same time, it's the same with the novels. You can read Spook Street and not have read any of the others, and you'd still really enjoy it. But at the same time, you have to think back to what's come, and you have to be sort of thoughtful and respectful for what these characters have been through in 3 seasons previous.
I want to get into a little bit of your relationships with some of the actors. Was there any scene this season that you might have had a certain idea going into it, but you had a moment or an encounter with one of the actors that changed the outcome of the scene.
There are a number of, these might sound like details, what I'm going to say, but I think it just shows the brilliance of these actors. So in episode 6, Gary, I knew that I wanted Lamb when he finds Bad Sam dead for it to kind of mirror the death scene from episode 4 and to play it in one and to just be with Gary. And I know that, I knew that you didn't need to see Sam's body for a while because Gary, you can just be on Gary because you just can feel everything through the slightest thing he does. I mean, it's like magic, really. So we did this, and it was just fantastic. And then we started to roll, and he just did this thing where, in the script he has to search and find the phone. It's important for the plot. So he did that, and then he just pat Sam's body. That's it. He just did a little pat, and we were all like breaking up, like watching this, like just. But it was just so sort of emotional, and so emotional because Lamb is so unemotional that the slightest bit of warmth like that tells you so much about their relationship, what he feels about this guy, their history, how it actually really hurts him, and then he grabs the whiskey and he marches out of there like twice the speed, like a force, and it was just those tiny things that were I just were incredible. And then there was another scene in episode 6 where it's scripted. Lamb comes in and he knocks out Patrice, and then Catherine says to him, is Marcus okay? And Lamb says no. And then we did it, and actually Gary looks up at Saskia, who's the most incredible actor as well. She's just fantastic. And she looks at him, doesn't say anything, just looks at him, and he just shakes his head, and she just looks at him and she just lowers her head. And it tells you everything, absolutely everything. Everything, all those words that were on the page, it didn't need them. It was just those two looks, those two actors. And it's that kind of thing. It's when you're working with these sort of masters, it's these little things, these little moments that they bring, and you just think, God, elevates the scene to beyond your imagination, I think.
What a dream as a director. It's like you're just creating moving art. I mean,
It's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, I'll give you one more example, if you don't mind. Just talking about Jack, who's just an unbelievable actor. And we talked about his scene with Frank, and we said, we were talking about the moment where he finds out Frank saw him escaping from the dogs in the station. And we were saying, oh, it's like, finding out your dad, who you haven't heard from for 10 years, was at the football game watching you. And then you watch what he does with that. And he's so vulnerable and deeply affected by the fact that his father was there that you can imagine him just saying, fine, I'll go with you. I don't care about anything else. You're my dad. It's that line of just like, he really does want a dad. And even though there's mad as a psychopath, it's sort of almost in that millisecond, it doesn't matter. And he gets that across in a look, and that's when you're just like, I don't know what this is. It's like black magic.
feels like it, and it feels like it when you're watching it. I mean, we've all been hanging on to the finale, waiting, waiting to see what happens next. I want to get into a little bit more about what it was like shooting specifically. I mean, some of the action sequences in that. What were some of the challenges? What were some of the beautiful surprises? What are you most proud of?
I mean, the challenges, the locations are absolutely massive. And actually, originally it wasn't set, it was set on the embankment. And I was actually in King's Cross over Christmas with my family, went to this pub, and I was looking out the canal. So this would be really great for where River meets Frank. And then I walked downstairs and I went onto the canal. I was like, oh, this would be such a good spot. And I sort of was thinking about that. And I rang Will and I was like, oh, it could be. What about if it was here? So we built it up from there, and then Will's brilliance is he's like, what if Frank puts a grenade in River's Hood? And it's just like, so I think, one of the challenges is to create enough chaos that you can buy into these different things. You can buy into the fact that there's so much chaos that Frank can get away. How do we do that? How are we going to do that? Okay, we can only have a certain amount of people. Yeah, we can have a couple of hundred, but how's he going to disappear? Okay, well, we need MI5 to be raising their guns to the police, and we need grenades going off, and we need people screaming. We need to create this kind of absolute chaos, and we need to do it at 3 a.m. when everybody's really tired and really, really cold, and the neighbours are complaining because we're louder than we said we'd be. So you've got those sort of challenges, I think. Because you always wanted to keep, even though it's sort of heightened, it still always wanted to be grounded and real. So that always feels like the challenge is how do we believe this? How are we going to persuade the audience that this could happen? Why doesn't someone just shoot Frank? Why doesn't so there's some of the challenges, and then I think it's also the shift of tones really, and thinking, how am I going to go from really fun, mad, sort of almost silly mayhem to something really heartfelt. How can I get Ko throwing a kettle at a guy, to then 30 seconds later being genuinely terrified for these characters, and so it was just a lot of kind of thought and mapping these things out, and spending a lot of time in Slough House, on my own, just walking around and figuring out all the beats, and kind of almost thinking of it like more like writing and directing a lot of the time, and going, okay, the little gags, the little moments, realizing, okay, I think I need to shoot Patrice here. Actually, he wasn't going to get shot. I think I need to shoot him because I need to feel like he's gone, and then I need to lose him, and I need to stop the bullets, and I need to turn it into something else. And so it was kind of constantly evolving, and really wanting to keep the audience constantly sort of on the edge of their seats, but also not tiring, not for it to feel like, oh, this is just bullets flying for 20 minutes, but it to feel like every chapters where it's shifting, it's changing tone and mood.
So, what can you say that you are going to bring into season 6 that might be familiar or different from what we saw in season 4, as far as your flair or your signature goes?
I mean, we're pushing it further. I think because I've done season 4, I've gone into season 6, with a confidence of like, okay, I'm going to push this further. It's difficult because I don't know what I can say and what I can't, but there's a little bit more kind of out of the city. So we were, I was able to kind of shoot different kind of landscapes and different kind of locations, put the slow horses in different kind of jeopardy. It's definitely, I think, a more emotional season. It's a darker season in some ways. Still funny and still, it's got a lot of big action. I'm really very, very excited about it.
The beautiful blend of everything.
Yeah, yeah.
So I asked some of the cast members this, and I would love to know if you had to depend on someone in Slough House in real life, who would it be and why?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on what, but the character who is definitely the most trustworthy, and the warmest would be Catherine. If I was in a gunfight, I wouldn't want Catherine necessarily, but in just day-to-day life, Catherine is, I mean, she's not necessarily the most stable all the time, but she's got an incredibly good heart. In many ways, you want Lamb if he's on your side because he's the smartest guy in the room at all times. But also, you don't know what he's going to say to you. So I think I'd stick with Catherine.
Good. That's good. It's funny hearing all of your different reactions, and yeah.
I'd love to hear what the others say.
Yeah, kind of very similar. Like it depends. It depends who you're calling for what, because
Yeah.
they all come in handy for different things. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Lastly, if you could award one of the characters in season 4 the title of MVP, who would it be?
That is tough. That is really tough. But I will say that I think season 4 is ultimately River's story. It's about finding out about his past in a way that the other seasons have never done, like in terms of getting deep into a character. You find out about his father, you find out his mother's, his home situation. It's his journey. And although you need every character in that, and there would be no slow horses if it wasn't for that. Lamb is always kind of the MVP anyway. But I think in this particular season, it definitely feels like River. And I think that David Cartwright, his grandfather, Jonathan, I just think it's just such an amazing performance and so moving that I would like to give him an award as well if I can.
So good. You're all MVPs in my book.
Okay,
They're all
thank you.
getting awards. Adam, it was so awesome hanging out with you today. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
you
for taking
too.
the time. It was a pleasure.
All right, thanks so much.